Hello, people. Welcome back to English Novels and Books. Here, you can watch and listen to millions of novels of every genre with illustrations demonstrating the stories. Don't forget to subscribe on our channel before you proceed and click on notification for our updates. Let's see what we have for you today. Here is what I have for you today. History of the 100 most influential men ever on the world, authored by Holt. When this is our first release of the book, let's give the preface to the second edition as Holt wrote. A dozen years after the 100 was first published, the book is still selling well, and translations into other languages keep appearing. Why then should there be a revised edition of the book? One reason for making revisions is that history did not come at a halt in 1978, when the first edition of this book was written. On the contrary, many new events have occurred since then, some of them quite unanticipated, and new historical figures have emerged. Even had my knowledge of the past been perfect 12 years ago, this book will still need revising because the world has changed since then. Of course, my knowledge of the past was far from perfect in 1978. In the intervening years, I have learned a lot from my own studies, and in addition, the response to my book has been educational. Many of the letters I received from readers mentioned historical facts that I had overlooked, or they pointed out new and often better ways of interpreting the facts I already knew. The same is true of many remarks made by callers in radio talk shows where I was a guest. A second reason, therefore, for this edition is to correct some of the shortcomings of the first. One of the most difficult and interesting tasks involved in writing the 100 was evaluating the relative importance of various political leaders. We all tend to overestimate the importance of current head of state. They seem to us like giants, whereas statesmen who lived a few centuries ago and who seemed every bit as important to their contemporaries are now nearly forgotten. It is far easier to evaluate the significance of an ancient leader. We can see the consequences, or at least the aftermath of his or her actions, and can use that information to estimate the person's importance. To estimate the importance of a current political figure is much harder, no matter how powerful a leader seems today, and no matter how innovative. It is difficult to foretell how long his or her influence will endure. A case in point is my ranking number 20 of Mao Zedong, now spelled Mao Zedong, in the first edition. That edition was written shortly after the days of Mao, when the memory of his achievement was still fresh. Of course, I realized at the time that Mao's importance will probably fade as the years went by. But I greatly underestimated the extent and the swiftness of that decline. Within a few years of Mao's death, the reforms instituted by his successor, Deng Xiaoping, have drastically altered many of Mao's most cherished policies. Since Deng seems to be undoing a good deal of Mao's program, it has been apparent for some time that the first edition of this book seriously overestimated Mao's long-term importance. Now, the first person of the list is Muhammad. He is the number one most influential man in the 100 of Holt. Muhammad was born in the year 570 after death and died in the year 632 after death. My choice of Muhammad to lead the list of the world's most influential persons may surprise some readers and may be questioned by others, but He was the only man in history who was supremely successful on both the religious and the secular levels. Of humble origins, Muhammad founded and promulgated one of the world's great religions and became an immensely effective political leader. Today, 13 centuries after his death, his influence is still powerful and pervasive. Most of the persons in this book had the advantage of being born and raised in centers of civilization, highly cultured or politically pivotal nations. Muhammad, however, was born in the year 570 in the city of Mecca in southern Arabia, at that time a backward area of the world, far from the centers of trade, art, and learning. Opened at age 6, he was reared in modest surroundings. Islamic tradition tells us that he was illiterate. His economic position improved when at age 25 he married a wealthy widow. Nevertheless, as he approached 40, there was little outward indication that he was a remarkable person. Most Arabs at that time were pagans and believed in many gods. There were, however, in Mecca, a small number of Jews and Christians. It was from them, most probably, that Muhammad first learned of a single, omnipotent God who ruled the entire universe. When he was 40 years old, Muhammad became convinced that this one true God, Allah, was speaking to him through the archangel Gabriel, and had chosen him to spread the truth path. For 3 years, Muhammad preached only to close friends and associates. Then about 613 AD, he began preaching in public. As he slowly gained converts, the Meccan authorities came to consider him a dangerous nuisance. In 622 AD, fearing for his safety, Muhammad fled to Medina, a city some 200 miles north of Mecca, where he had been offered a position of considerable political power. This flight, called the Hijrah, was the turning point of the Prophet's life. In Mecca, he had few followers. In Medina, he had many more, and he soon acquired an influence that made him virtually an absolute ruler. During the next few years, while Muhammad's following grew rapidly, a series of battles were fought between Medina and Mecca. This war ended in 630 AD with Muhammad's triumphant return to Mecca as conqueror. The remaining 2.5 years of his life witnessed the rapid conversion of the Arab tribes to the new religion. When Muhammad died in 603 too, he was the effective ruler of all southern Arabia. The Bedouin tribesmen of Arabia had a reputation as fierce warriors, but their number was small and plagued by disunity and internecine warfare. There had been no match for the larger armies of the kingdoms in the settled agricultural areas to the north. However, unified by Muhammad for the first time in Muhammad's history, and inspired by their fervent belief in the one true God, these small Arab armies now embarked upon one of the most astonishing series of conquests in human history. To the northeast of Arabia lay the large Neo-Persian Empire of the Sassanids. To the northwest lay the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. Numerically, the Arabs were no match for their opponents on the field of battle, though it was far different, and the inspired Arabs rapidly conquered all of Mesopotamia, Syria, and Palestine. By 642 AD, Egypt had been wrested from the Byzantine Empire, while the Persian army had been crushed at the key battles of Qadisiyah in 637 and Nehavend in 642. But even these enormous conquests, which were made under the leadership of Muhammad's close friends and immediate successors, Abu Bakr and Umar ibn al-Khattab, did not mark the end of the Arab advance. By 711, the Arab armies had swept completely across North Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. There, they turned north and crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, overwhelmed the Visigoth kingdom in Spain for a while. It must have seemed that the Muslims would overwhelm all Christian Europe. However, in 732, at the famous Battle of Tours, a Muslim army which had advanced into the center of France was at last defeated by the Franks. Nevertheless, in a scant century of fighting, these Bedouin tribesmen, inspired by the word of the Prophet, had carved out an empire stretching from the borders to India to the Atlantic Ocean, the largest empire that the world had yet seen, and everywhere that the armies conquered, large-scale conversion to the new faith eventually followed. Now, not all these conquests proved permanent. The Persians, though they have remained faithful to the religion of the Prophet, have since regained their independence from the Arabs. And in Spain, more than 7 centuries of warfare finally resulted in the Christians reconquering the entire peninsula. However, Mesopotamia and Egypt, the true cradles of ancient civilization, have remained Arab, as has the entire coast of north towards Muslim territory as the days of Muhammad, 632 after death. The new religion, of course, continued to spread in the intervening centuries far beyond the borders of the original Muslim conquests. Currently, it has tens of millions of adherents in Africa and Central Asia, and even more in Pakistan and northern India and Indonesia. In Indonesia, the new faith has been a unifying factor in Indian subcontinent. However, the conflict between Muslims and Hindus is still a major obstacle to unity. How, then, is one to assess the overall impact of Muhammad on human history? Like all religions, Islam exerts an enormous influence upon the lives of its followers. It is for this reason that the founders of the world's great religions all figure prominently in this book, since there are roughly twice as many Christians as Muslims in the world. It may initially seem strange that Muhammad has been ranked higher than Jesus. There are 2 principal reasons for that decision. First, Muhammad played a far more important role in the development of Islam than Jesus did in the development of Christianity. Although Jesus was responsible for the main ethical and moral precepts of Christianity, insofar as this differed from Judaism, it was St. Paul who was the main developer of Christian theology, its principal proselytizer, and the author of a large portion of the New Testament. Muhammad, however, was responsible for both the theology of Islam and its main ethical and moral principles. In addition, he played the key role in proselytizing the new faith and in establishing the religious practice of Islam. Moreover, he is the author of the Muslim holy scriptures, the Quran, a collection of Muhammad's statements that he believed had been divinely inspired. Most of these utterances were copied faithfully during Muhammad's lifetime and were collected in authoritative form not longer after his death. The Quran therefore closely represents Muhammad's ideas and teachings, and to a considerable extent his exact words. No such detailed compilation of the teachings of Christ has survived. Since the Quran is at least as important to Muslims as the Bible is to Christians, The influence of Muhammad through the medium of the Quran has been enormous. It is probable that the relative influence of Muhammad on Islam has been larger than the combined influence of Jesus Christ and Saint Paul on Christianity. On the purely religious level, then, it seems likely that Muhammad has been as influential in human history as Jesus. Furthermore, Muhammad, unlike Jesus, was a secular as well as a religious leader. In fact, are the driving force behind the Arab conquests. He may well rank as the most influential political leader of all time. Of many important historical events, one might say that they were inevitable and would have occurred even without the political leader who guided them. For example, the South American colonies would probably have won their independence from Spain even if Simon Bolivar had never lived. But this cannot be said of the Arab conquests. Nothing similar had occurred before Muhammad, and there is no reason to believe that the conquest would have been achieved without him. The only comparable conquests in human history are those of the Mongols in the 13th century, which were primarily due to the influence of Genghis Khan. These conquests, however, though more extensive than those of the Arabs, did not prove permanent. And today, the only areas occupied by the Mongols are those that they held prior to the time of Genghis Khan. It is far different with the conquest of the Arabs. From Iraq to Morocco, from there extends a whole chain of Arab nations united not merely by their faith in Islam, but also by the Arabic language, history, and culture. The centrality of the Quran in the Muslim religion and the fact that it is written in Arabic have probably prevented the Arab language from breaking off into mutually unintelligible dialects, which might otherwise have occurred in the intervening 13 centuries. Differences and divisions between these Arab states exist, of course, and they are considerable. But the partial disunity should not blind us to the important elements of unity that have continued to exist. For instance, neither Iran nor Indonesia, both oil-producing states and both Islamic religion, joined the oil embargo of the winter of 1973 or 74. It is no coincidence that all the Arab states and only the Arab states participated in the embargo. We see, then, that the Arab conquests of the 7th century have continued to play an important role in human history, down to the present day. It is this unparalleled combination of secular and religious influence which I feel entitles Muhammad to be considered the most influential single figure in human history. Let's meet in episode 2 with the history of Sir Isaac Newton, the second most influential man on earth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click on notification bell for regular updates on all English